December 7, 1941. A date that President Franklin D. Roosevelt would call a day which will live in infamy. That Sunday morning, just before 8 a.m., the Japanese Imperial Navy launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In under 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet lay crippled, with 2,403 Americans killed and over 1,000 wounded. The United States was at war. But while soldiers prepared for battle overseas, another war began at home. A silent, shameful campaign waged not on foreign enemies, but on innocent citizens. This is the story of how fear, fueled by racism and war hysteria, led the United States to turn on its own, imprisoning over 120,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps without trial, without evidence, and without justice. In the early 1900s, Japanese immigrants, the Issei, began arriving in the United States. Many settled along the West Coast, drawn by the promise of work in agriculture, fishing, and railroads. They were not always welcomed. Asian immigrants, including the Chinese and Japanese, faced systemic discrimination. Laws barred them from owning land or becoming U.S. citizens. Signs on businesses read, "No Japs allowed." Anti-Asian riots erupted in cities like San Francisco and Seattle. Despite this, the Issei persevered. They raised families, opened businesses, and built vibrant communities. Their children, the Nisei, American-born citizens, grew up pledging allegiance to the flag, attending American schools, and dreaming of the future. By 1940, Japanese Americans were an integral part of life in California, Oregon, and Washington. But prejudice lingered beneath the surface. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. In the days that followed, America was gripped by panic. The West Coast braced for another strike. Rumors spread that Japanese American farmers were cutting directional arrows into crops to guide Japanese bombers. Others claimed Japanese American store owners were secretly signaling to submarines offshore. There was no proof. Not a single act of espionage was uncovered. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover himself reported there was no credible threat from Japanese Americans. But facts didn't matter. Public opinion turned hostile. Newspapers, politicians, and radio hosts demanded action. California Attorney General Earl Warren, later Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, called for mass removal. So did Army General John L. DeWitt, who infamously declared, "A Jap's a Jap. It makes no difference whether the Jap is a citizen or not." This wasn't about national security. This was about race. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. It gave military authorities the power to remove anyone from military zones, a vague phrase that would soon be applied exclusively to the West Coast's Japanese American population. They were ordered to leave everything behind: homes, farms, businesses, and report to assembly centers. They had days to pack. Many had less. In cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle, families were given one suitcase per person. They sold what they could. Some abandoned everything. Entire neighborhoods emptied in days. They were rounded up and sent to makeshift detention centers in places like fairgrounds and horse racetracks. At Santa Anita, over 18,000 people were forced to live in horse stalls, surrounded by barbed wire. One survivor remembered. It smelled like manure. The walls didn't go all the way up. You could hear everyone crying at night. They stayed there for weeks, sometimes months, waiting for trains to the unknown. Eventually, they were sent to one of 10 internment camps, officially called relocation centers. These weren't located in cities or suburbs. They were in remote, unforgiving landscapes, deserts in Arizona, swamps in Arkansas, wind-blown plains in Wyoming. The camps included Manzanar, California; Tule Lake, California; Minidoka, Idaho; Heart Mountain, Wyoming; Topaz, Utah, and others. Conditions were brutal. Families were assigned to single-room barracks with no insulation, no plumbing, and little privacy. Dust storms were common. In some camps, temperatures ranged from 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer to below freezing in winter. Food was served in communal mess halls. Bathrooms were shared. Privacy didn't exist. Yet through this hardship, communities emerged. Schools were formed. Churches opened. Newspapers circulated. Baseball teams played games. Children drew pictures behind barbed wire. Parents tried to smile through the humiliation. They endured. In 1943, the government introduced a loyalty questionnaire. It asked internees to declare whether they would serve in the U.S. military and renounce loyalty to the Japanese emperor, a question that made little sense to Nisei, who had never set foot in Japan. Two questions caused controversy. Question 1. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States? Question 2. Will you forswear any allegiance to the Japanese emperor? Many answered yes, yes, eager to prove loyalty. Others answered no, no, either out of protest or confusion. Those who refused were branded no, no boys and sent to Tule Lake, which became a segregated high-security camp. Families were torn apart. Friends turned on each other. The government had succeeded in sowing division within the imprisoned population. Despite their treatment, over 33,000 Japanese Americans served in the U.S. military during World War II. The most famous unit was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up almost entirely of Nisei soldiers. They fought in Europe, in Italy, France, and Germany, earning more than 18,000 individual awards, including 21 Medals of Honor, over 9,000 Purple Hearts. Their motto was, "Go for broke." They famously rescued the Lost Battalion in France, suffering over 800 casualties to save 200 Texan soldiers. At home, their families remained imprisoned behind fences. Yet they fought, not for revenge, but for redemption. They became the most decorated military unit of its size in U.S. history. Not all chose the path of military service. Some Japanese Americans resisted the draft, arguing that they should not be forced to fight for a country that had stripped them of their rights. These men, including Gordon Hirabayashi, Fred Korematsu, and Minoru Yasui, took their cases to court. In 1944, the Supreme Court ruled in Korematsu v. United States that internment was constitutional, a decision that remains one of the most controversial in American legal history. It wouldn't be formally overturned until 2018, over 70 years later. In 1945, the war ended. The camps were gradually dismantled. Japanese Americans were told to go home. But home was gone. Many returned to vandalized houses, stolen land, and hostile neighbors. Some were forced to live in abandoned churches or shared housing. They received no compensation, no apology, just a bus ticket and $25. The scars ran deep. Survivors rarely spoke of their trauma. Some buried it. Others tried to forget. But the memory lived on quietly. Decades later, the children and grandchildren of internees began to ask, why did this happen? In the 1970s, the redress movement gained momentum. Survivors testified before Congress. Advocacy groups demanded accountability. In 1980, the U.S. government created the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. Its conclusion? Internment was not justified by military necessity. It was a result of race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, issuing a formal apology and granting $20,000 in reparations to each surviving internee. President Reagan said, "We gather here today to right a grave wrong. No payment can make up for those lost years, but we can at least acknowledge that they happened." For many, it wasn't about the money. It was about being heard, being seen. Today, the sites of internment camps have become historical landmarks, places of reflection and education. Institutions like the Japanese American National Museum preserve the stories of those who lived through this dark chapter. But internment isn't just history. It's a warning, because after September 11th, similar calls for mass surveillance and suspicion echoed across America, this time directed at Muslims, Sikhs, and South Asians. Because immigrant children have again been detained in camps. Because fear still finds new faces. Over 120,000 people. 2/3 were U.S. citizens. They lost their homes, their freedom, and, for many, their faith in their country. But they never lost their dignity. The Japanese-American internment remains one of the most shameful chapters in U.S. history. And yet, it is also a story of resilience, resistance, and the enduring fight for justice. We remember it not to shame a nation, but to shape a better one. Because the price of forgetting is repeating. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden chapters of history. Let's keep their memory alive and ensure their voices are never silenced again.